Now chapter 6, as we said, represents really an element of fortune telling, and it is one of the most popular elements around today. Excuse me. Supposed to start off by reminding everybody to turn off their mobiles, right? Inshallah. Okay. So astrology, as we said, represents an element of fortune telling. It is one of the branches of fortune telling from the Islamic perspective. And the term used in Arabic for this whole area of astrology is tanjim. Tanjim. And tanjim comes from the Arabic term najm. Najm. Right? I think people take that name, don't they, too? I've heard some people by that name, najm. But najm means star. Right? So tanjim comes from the root najm, which means star. So the general heading of tanjim in Arabic includes three categories. One, the belief that human beings, animals, the various elements on the earth may be influenced by the stars, heavenly bodies. They have power over events which take place on the earth. Right? This is one set of beliefs. The second set is the Muslim version, where a person says the same thing, but they say by the will of Allah. Right? And this was the one argued by the Muslim astrologists, Muslims who claimed knowledge of the astrological signs, the zodiac, etc., and did calculations for you, just like the non-Muslim, but they just added in the end of it, inshallah. The third category is what we call, astronomy, really. It's dealing with your heavenly bodies, your planets, your stars, your, meteors, etc., but it is using it for calculations of directions. The North Star is used by travelers on the desert to be able to determine which way you're going, or travelers on the sea. They use it for identifying the directions on the earth, right? Or it may be used by farmers to determine the seasons. Where people, in the past especially, today now you have calendars, etc., but in the past where people didn't use the calendars, they used the stars, the movement of the stars, etc., planets, to indicate the seasons for them, telling them when to plant their crops and when to, harvest. Okay, so these are the three basic areas. The third area, obviously, is legitimate. The first two are illegitimate. The first category, that of the belief that earthly beings are controlled by the stars, the heavenly bodies. This is, in fact, a form of shirk. This is giving the control which Allah has over His creatures to stars, planets, etc. And this is quite ancient. It's an ancient belief. It found its origin, as far as anthropological research indicates, from the 3rd millennium before the time of Christ, and came to China, to India. It's a very important part of Indian beliefs. Indians, meaning the Hindus, usually don't marry without looking at the star zodiacal signs of the person they're going to marry. That is a critical part of marriage. And Muslims, of course, they engage in it also, But it's a Hindu practice, and it's ancient, prior to the coming of Islam. And the Greeks also made it, really it was there in Egypt too, but the Greeks shifted it from being something special to the royal court to making it accessible to the general masses. In Mesopotamia, in early India and China, etc., this was only known to the royal court. The ruler and his entourage, they would have amongst them an astrologer who would make the signs, etc., and they would pay him. That's how this individual lived. The common person didn't have any money. He was a serf. He was a slave, basically, in the society. So what is the astrologer going to go and tell them anything for? There's no value in it. He would only serve the royal court. So it was something unique to the royal court. Whereas in Greece, the idea of the Greek citizen, having some elements of equality, they're still rulers, but the Greek citizen now was not himself a slave. There was a slave class, or caste, but the main society, the main members of society were born free, according to them. So they had an ability to rise in the society themselves, and as such, astrology found a popular also base amongst the general citizens of the society. And that form was adopted along with the other, Greco-Roman shirk-type beliefs into Christianity. Because once Christianity left the Middle East and went into Greece and Rome, it adopted a variety of cultural practices of those areas. It adopted some of their beliefs, the idea of the Trinity, etc. This is coming out of Greek philosophical beliefs and Roman beliefs about the sun god, etc. And along with it, they adopted the beliefs concerning astrology. And that's why you find many of the early Christian writers like Dante and Thomas Aquinas and others, they accepted astrological causation, that this was a reality, that the zodiac did have a reality to it. They accepted it as an exact science. But the Prophet ﷺ 1,400 years ago cancelled that, said it was false, said it was a part of magic, was a part of trickery, fortune telling, etc., and banned it outright. Because, as we said, in the same as the other element of fortune telling that we spoke about before, it is involved in predicting the future. Because when a person makes a chart for you, a zodiacal chart, they are working out certain character traits and claiming that this is a result of being born under a particular star. You're born in this month, that month, you are a Virgo, or you're a Taurus, or you're this, and this indicates your personality, and that's why they'll tell you it's not good to marry, for Taurus to marry a Cancer, or for this one to marry that one, or whatever, So this becomes a form of prediction, saying that if you get married, your marriage is not going to work out. This is fortune telling. Or if you get married, it's going to work out because you're from these two signs. That's fortune telling. That's predicting the future. Not based on anything really and truly scientific. That's why Prophet ﷺ said, whoever acquires knowledge of any branch of astrology has acquired knowledge of a branch of magic. The more he increases in that knowledge, the more he increases in sin. The Muslim version entered amongst the Muslim rulership during the period of the Abbasids, during the second major Muslim empire. After the righteous caliphs, you had the Umayyads, who ruled for about 100 plus years. Then came the Abbasids. They were, based in Baghdad. This is where your stories of Sinbad and all this come from, that element. The 1,001 Nights, this is from that period. Harun al-Rashid, this is from the period of the Abbasids. And the Abbasid, in the initial stages of the Abbasid Empire, they were actually quite Islamic, because they did establish their state on the basis of bringing back the rule of Islam to the family of the Prophet. Because the Abbasids, they take their name from Al-Abbas, who was the uncle of Prophet Muhammad ﷺ. And they used the black turbans because this Prophet ﷺ used to use it in times of jihad, special occasions. He wore a black turban, otherwise they wore white. And this was one of the symbols, the black banners, the black turbans, one of the symbols of the Abbasid Empire. So in the initial, initial rulers of the Abbasid Empire, I mean, they were very close to the Sunnah. Some of them, like Harun al-Rashid, was actually a scholar, an alim himself. He had studied, he had teachers who taught him privately, and he had reached a body of knowledge sufficient to make rulings himself, actually. Later on, corruption started to set in, and the Abbasids started to include in their court the typical forms of entertainment found in other courts in the other nations. So they brought in dancing girls, singing girls. They brought in jesters. Jesters, in the court jester, one who would make the court, the ruler and his entourage laugh. A comedian, what we call now a comedian, right? Joker. It's called a joker, yeah, or jester. This is the other name for them. They included also the court scholar, which was not a bad element, but actually it had negative effects on the development of Islamic law. The court scholar, what they used to do, they'd bring a scholar from the Shafi'i madhab, and a scholar from the Hanafi madhab, because these were the major two madhabs at the time. Hanbali madhab had more or less almost disappeared at that point, and the Maliki madhab was mostly in North Africa and Spain. So it was the main two schools of Islamic law were the Shafi'i and Hanafi, and so he would have a Shafi'i and Hanafi scholar or group of scholars in his court, and he would make a suggestion of some mas'ala, some issue, some legal issue, and the two sides would debate, for the intellectual enjoyment of the caliph and his entourage. And what happened, actually at first it wasn't so bad. I mean, it was knowledge being debated, discussed, etc. But later on, it took on, what came out of it was that people would now argue not for the sake of finding the truth, but for the sake of winning the argument. Because the one who won would be given a purse of gold. So you had now scholars who were ready to argue, and they started to learn Greek logic, and they started to go out trying to find any kind of way to strengthen their arguments. So why? Because they didn't want to lose, and they want to win the prize. So then you found now this kind of argumentation, of course it becomes negative, it's no longer any good. Because if you're arguing just to win the argument, then it means that you will not give up. Even though all the evidence is presented against you, you're going to fight to the last, right? Because to lose is to disgrace the madhab, is to, you lose the purse, everything else. So this is where you now develop that issue of, what they call ta'assub. You're going to hold on to your madhab, do or die, kind of approach. And what else all came out of that? This is now relating to fiqh. You don't have any fiqh class. So we do touch a little bit of fiqh, is what they call hypothetical fiqh. So when they ran out of real issues to discuss, right? Because you can imagine, after 100 years or 50 years of these kind of debates, there's only so many things you can find to talk about. When you run out, what do you do then? Then you start to make up issues. So you find in the books of fiqh which were written in that latter period, a whole body of what we call hypothetical fiqh, where they invent issues which, if you read them today, they become ludicrous. Actually, if some of these things got out into the West and they published them, they would be a great embarrassment to Muslims. For example, in one of the books, the Shafi'i fiqh books, written of that period, they discussed the issue of what would happen if a person passed wind into a bag, closed the bag, and then later let the wind out of the bag, would that break his wudu or not? They didn't stop to ask, who would do that in his right mind? Right? But the issue was, is the passing of wind, when it actually comes out of your body at that time, or you save it and let it out later, will that break your wudu or not? So, this is what you understand what I'm saying? This is where it becomes very, very, foolish. Unfortunately, you'll find books of that era, you find no end of these kind of masail. And also the Hanafi books of the same period, which, for me it became a major embarrassment. I went to Singapore, and in this organization called Darul Arqam, they're involved with new Muslims there, etc. And they had some books which they were distributing. Right? And I found a book there which was supposed to be, it's on Islam, basic Islam, fundamentals of Islam. So I'm flipping through this book, and I'm starting to read things. I said, what in the world is this? Where did this come from? It had things that were just unimaginable. And one section which really just hit me, I said, they were talking about things which break wudu. And one of the issues that they mentioned was if a man has sexual relations with a fish. I said, brothers, please take this book and burn it. Because if any non-Muslim ever reads this, they say, what are Muslims involved in? This is just something. So, this is from the product of that era. The court, we had the court scholar, they also had the court astrologer, who would tell the ruler, if there are battles to come, or what's going to happen, in the coming year, whether he should do this, whether he should do that, they would advise him on it. So, this became a part of the royal entourage, in that period. And so, those involved in it, because of course they knew the hadiths, these are Muslims, they knew the hadiths, and the Muslim scholars spoke against astrology, clearly. So what could they do? They said, we are making our predictions, and we're adding at the end of it, inshallah. Now, does inshallah change the practice that they're doing? Of course not. There's a difference between saying inshallah after making a weather prediction and saying inshallah after, making a zodiacal, chart for somebody. One is based on a reality, the other one is fiction. It's made up. The images that have been placed on the stars, whether it is Cancer or Pisces or whatever, these are imaginary lines drawn between to create an image. These are not really true images. It's just things superimposed on the stars. And we know that the stars don't have the kind of influence that they're speaking of. It is true that the sun, the sun as well as the moon has influence on the earth. There's scientific elements that have to do with the tides and these kinds of things. We know that, right? Sometimes hurricanes and things like that are affected by sunspots and things happening on the sun. But they're not talking about that kind of thing. They're talking about personality. What type of person you are. What will you do, what won't you do. So, this is what we say this is unacceptable, whether you use inshallah after it or whether you say bismillah before it. Unfortunately, I had the experience where in talking about this same topic in a lecture I gave in New York some years back, one of the people in the audience, who from the way he was speaking it came out that he was in fact himself a Muslim astrologist, he stood up and said that there is support for it in the Quran. He said, this is, I was saying haram. He was saying, no, it's halal. It's in the Quran. I said, well, where in the Quran? He said, Surah Al-Buruj. And I'm sure you all took this issue of Yusuf Ali's interpretation, his translation of Al-Buruj as being the zodiacal signs. So that became a defense for those who were involved in it. But the third category, as we said, that which is based on really scientific facts in terms of direction, identifying the north and the south, or the seasons, this is legitimate. And the verse in the Quran, stop for the adhan. In Surah Al-An'am, Bismillah wa salatu wa salam wa Rasulillah, in Surah Al-An'am, where Allah says, وَهُوَ الَّذِي جَعْلَ لَكُمُ النُّجُومَ لِتَهْتَدُوا بِهَا فِي ظُلُمَاتِ الْبَرِّ وَالْبَحْرِ. He is the one who made the stars as guidance for you in the darkness of the land and the sea. This is the verse 97, which forms the basis of using the stars for guidance in travel. Right? Common sense, actually, when you look at it also, is there, but there is a Quranic sanction for it. The other verse, where Allah mentions, وَعَلَامَاتٍ بِالنَّجْمِ وَبِالنَّجْمِ هُمْ يَهْتَدُونَ, in Surah Nahl, verse 16, and the signs and with the stars they're rightly guided. And this was the verse which the early Muslim, so-called Muslim astrologists would use to justify their use of astrology, right? Because it says that this, with the signs and with the stars, they're rightly guided. They're rightly guided with the stars. So they said this is the proof, part of the proof in the old times. However, when you are presented with something like that, somebody pulls this verse out to you, and they say to you, here's proof that we can depend on astrology. How do you respond to that? Well, we say to them, was that the understanding of the companions of the Prophet ﷺ? Is that how they understood this verse? Right? And when you go back to the scholars of tafsir from the generation of the Prophet ﷺ, the Sahaba, Ibn Abbas, who was referred to as the translator of the Quran, he said that signs mentioned in this verse meant road signs or landmarks in the daylight hours. There were not references to stars at all. He went on to say that with the stars they're rightly guided meant that they're guided by them at night during their travels on the sea and the land. So he, Ibn Abbas, clarified that this was the correct understanding of that verse. And that's why we can stand firm in the face of the astrologer that their approach is wrong, because they don't have support from the explanation of the Sahaba, because they best understood the Quran. And of course you took that in your study on Ulum al-Quran or Usul al-Tafsir, that the third level of tafsir after tafsir of the Quran by the Sunnah and the Quran by the Quran is that of the tafsir of the Quran by the explanations of the Sahaba. Whether they give you the reasons for revelation or they clarified how it was understood amongst themselves. Right? And so their clarification, their understanding is given precedence over any latter day understanding. Otherwise, if we don't have that as a basis, then the Quran becomes like the Bible. Anybody can interpret it to mean anything. And that's what sort of held the Ummah together, that the correct path, the correct understanding remains available to Muslims and will remain available to the last day. When we look at Christians instead, of course there is no one holding on to the clear, correct understanding anymore. It's become so confused, everyone is able to interpret it his way and her way and the other way, that everybody's free to do. Nobody can say one is more right over the other. It's just a question of numbers. We have the bigger numbers, the Catholics have the bigger numbers, so they will argue, we were first, or whatever. But in reality, they don't have any claim or any basis for a claim to authenticity, because they don't have any evidence from that early generation. Religion has evolved. They consider it to be a plus point, right? That their religion has evolved, with time. And people look at Islam as being inappropriate because it hasn't evolved. But reality is that if it is from God and human beings don't change, there is no need for evolution. The facts which govern human life are not going to change from the time of Adam till today. So it's only one message needs to be there. There doesn't need to be any evolution. The application of the basic knowledge may change from circumstance to circumstance, because our knowledge of our environment, the world that we're in, increases or decreases, is affected as time passes. So our rulings might change in terms of application of the law, but the basic law, no need to change, because human society has not changed. So that's the principle that we follow in general, and it becomes particularly important in this topic in and of itself, because otherwise people could find support in the Quran for astrology. And we said our main argument against the Yusuf Ali interpretation was that that's not what it was understood as in the early generation, right? Buruj didn't have that meaning. Okay, we'll just stop here. We're almost on our time for Salah. We'll take a break for prayer and then come back. Is there any questions? We take maybe a couple of questions before breaking.
Dr. Rob, that same astrological application, or definition rather, applies to like the Chinese New Year, the year of the this and the year of the that, those same types of characteristics that are associated with those different years and different animals, I guess.
Yeah, the brother's question or comment concerning the Chinese practice of naming a year, like this is the year of the pig, وَلِعَاذُ بِاللَّهِ, right? Last year was the year of the rat or the dog or whatever which one it was. They name each year after, and through it they make certain predictions, as to what will happen. This is the element of astrology that reached them, and that's how it evolved amongst them. But it comes from the same source, and we reject it as a part and parcel of astrology in general. So we said that astrology destroys Tawheed al-Asma wa Sifat because what?
Allah alone knows the future.
Yes. It is giving human beings or the planets or whatever the attributes of Allah, which is knowledge of the future, or qadr, what is going to take place.